Chapter 5. Watching a trio of little boys roll down a grassy hill, their high-pitched whoops trembling together with their laughter, Mike let himself bask, for a few seconds, in the kids' glee. The boys were a blur of motion, curly hair, a red tennis shoe, skinny white arms, plump-faced grins, a triumphant fist. The boys appeared to be racing, but their race devolved into a wrestling/tumbling match. When they reached the bottom of the hill, they shot to their feet and raised triumphant fists. They all seemed to think they won. What would it be like to be so carefree? Mike asked himself. Thinking about his dream, he reminded himself that he had a micro-taste of that kind of devil-may-care fun every night. He almost wished he didn't, though. When that feeling was stolen from him, over and over and over again, as his dream repeated night after night, the loss was made more profound by that memory of what fun felt like. The boys ran back up the hill, and Mike watched them start another tumbling around. Then he broadened his gaze to take in the Child Development Center at the top of the hill. In contrast to the government building Mike had been in the day before, the Development Center was a sleek, modern white flow of long, glass-filled walls under a gleaming metal roof. Surrounded by nature, the expanses of grass as well as expertly landscaped displays of flowering bushes and tall trees, the center was not even in the same universe as the ugly brick building that housed social services. Even the sky was prettier here, or so it seemed. Yesterday's suffocating gray sky was gone. Today's sky was cyan blue, and it was filled with playful white clouds, all puffy and soft-edged and rolling through the sky, not unlike the boys rolling down the hill. The sun was playing peekaboo with the clouds. Its brilliance nipped in and out as it peeked from behind the white sky suds and then dipped back behind them again. The little boys weren't the only kids having fun on the grassy hills outside the center and on the playground equipment in a sandy circular area near the edge of the grass. 20-plus kids were running around or pumping themselves higher and higher on the swings or climbing on the monkey bars or teeter-tottering with a friend. The kids ranged in age from about 6 to 15. The older kids weren't playing. They were either sitting in the grass or on one of the wrought iron benches placed throughout the area. They either chatted with each other or spoke to white-coated adults. The adults were the doctors, MDs or PhDs, who oversaw the kids who came to the center. The center's doctors had a wide array of expertise. Mike had found out. They were trained to help all sorts of kids with all sorts of developmental problems. Leaning against the chain-link fence at the outer edge of the center's sprawling property, Mike vaguely wondered how his life might have turned out differently if he'd had a place like this to come to when he was 12. Grief was a developmental problem, wasn't it? Loss and guilt could stunt growth every bit as much as the kind of psychological problems they treated here. Turning away from the more active children, Mike forced himself to look toward his sister. He spotted her, of course, as soon as he'd gotten out of his car. Abby sat on one of the benches not far from the center's portico-covered entrance. Bent over her drawing pad with her colored pencils, Abby was well away from all the other kids. Even so, she was talking. Mike was far enough away from Abby that he couldn't hear what she was saying, but he could see her lips moving. He could also see her turn to look beside her or look out in front of the bench, as if she was speaking to invisible companions. The sun burst from behind the clouds again, and the light blinded Mike. Closing his eyes, he wiped his face with his palms. Man, he was exhausted. No matter how much time he spent in bed, he never got enough rest. No mystery there. Sleep wasn't sleep for Mike. It was a project. Mike felt a cool hand on his forearm, and he inhaled the scent of orange blossoms. He opened his eyes and did his best to smile at the slender white-haired woman who stood in front of him. Dr. Lillian, Abby's psychologist, was a nice lady, with large eyes that might have been dark blue, or green, or brown. Mike hadn't been able to figure it out, because the color seemed to change depending on lighting, or maybe depending on the doctor's mood. Dr. Lillian had a friendly face with a wide, full-lipped smile. Tall and graceful, Dr. Lillian wore her hair in a shaggy chin-length cut, and her clothes were as casual as her hair. She usually had on loose, light-colored yoga pants and pastel-colored tunic shirts. She didn't wear a lab coat. "They're here," Dr. Lillian said. "Are you ready?" Mike's weak smile disappeared entirely. "Not really," he said. Dr. Lillian patted his arm, but she didn't speak. Mike was sure she wanted to help, but there were some things she couldn't do. "Let's get this over with." Usually, Mike was pretty comfortable in Dr. Lillian's office, a nice large room with thick blue carpet and furnished sparsely but comfortably, with a small white desk, a row of matching shelves stuffed with books and a few nature-themed photos, a high-backed pale blue office chair, 3 matching plush, thick-armed guest chairs, and a long blue and cream striped sofa. The office was obviously designed to be calming. Most days it was, but not today. It wasn't possible for a room to be calming when Aunt Jane was in it. Her presence was calm as kryptonite. At just 5'4", Jane Schmidt wasn't an imposing woman. Her petite appearance was helped along by the pastel pantsuits she nearly always wore. Today's suit was a very pale green. When Jane stood still, and if you didn't know her, she could look insubstantial, even inconsequential, with short, dirty blonde hair that Mike was pretty sure she dyed now. She was, after all, in her 50s. Jane had a pale, freckled complexion, ordinary brown eyes, and a narrow face shaped like an upside-down egg. In the abstract, she might have been pretty, if not for her personality. "Just look at him!" Mike's aunt angrily shouted. She waved her arms wildly. Combined with her exaggerated facial expressions, the flopping arms made her look unhinged. And she thought he had problems. Well, he did have problems, but that wasn't the point. Dr. Lillian's guest chairs were arranged in front of her desk, spaced about 2 feet apart. 2 feet wasn't nearly enough space. Mike, sitting to Aunt Jane's left, had to lean back when she threw her arms out. On the other side of Aunt Jane, her lawyer cowered in the other guest chair. He was sitting, so he canted back and away from his client. Clearly, he didn't want to be close to her more than Mike did. Dr. Lillian, safely behind her desk, was the only person sitting straight. She was also the only person in the room who seemed to be benefiting from her calm decor. "What is it, 10 o'clock in the morning?" Jane continued with a tirade. "And he can barely keep his eyes open." Mike, who was aware his eyes were half closed, resisted the urge to shut them entirely. As tired as he was, his eyes weren't drooping because of that. He had them partially shut to try to dampen the impact of his aunt's tantrum. This was a trick he had learned many years before. Aunt Jane was wound up for a very specific reason today. She had an agenda, but it wouldn't have mattered if she didn't have one. She was just a high-strung woman, petty, loud, and judgmental. Jane was the reason Mike had learned the word narcissistic when he was a boy. It was the word his mother had always used to describe her sister-in-law. Jane whipped her arms through the air again. Mike pulled back like a turtle shrinking into its shell. If only he had a shell to shrink into. "This degenerate," Jane continued, "is being entrusted with the well-being of a mentally ill child." Mike involuntarily brought a hand up to cover his right ear. Jane's high pitch, which would have been an operatic soprano proud, was literally hurting his eardrums. Cocking his head, Mike looked behind Jane to see if the lawyer, "Just call me Doug, I'm not on formalities," was having the same problem. But he couldn't tell. Doug, a large man whose body was freakishly similar in shape to a melting ice cream cone, gave no indication that he was hearing or seeing anything. The only reason Mike could tell Doug was alive was that Doug's chest heaved visibly with the effort to breathe, and he made a faint whistling sound each time he exhaled. Studying Doug, Mike had a hard time understanding how the man had become a lawyer, or how he kept a practice going. He looked like he was on the verge of going into a coma. Jane might have been making a big deal about Mike's droopy eyes, but what about her lawyer's slack lids? Heck, his whole face was slack, round and jowly. Doug's cheeks pressed up against a fleshy nose and squeezed a too small mouth. His tiny eyes were gray and dull-looking. They matched his suit, which was the color of the previous day's clouds. The suit was baggy and wrinkled. Mike shifted his attention away from Doug and returned it to his aunt, who was still ranting. He turned back in, dressed for kicks. Who cared for the mentally ill showed just a bit of maturity. Jane pointed at Mike's jeans and t-shirt. Do you see maturity in him? Jane put her fists on her hips and glared at Dr. Lillian. Dr. Lillian ignored the question. As I've made clear many times, Dr. Lillian said, Abby is not mentally ill. Aunt Jane made a sound that was half snort and half raspberry. Oh, right, she said. Of course not. Because it's perfectly normal to sit around by yourself drawing pictures and talking to magical creatures who don't exist. Jane wound herself up even tighter. That child is a train wreck, she shouted. She's light years behind where she should be at this age, and it's only going to get worse. By the time Jane got to the end of the sentence, her face was bright red, and her voice was cracking. How about we all take a slow breath, Dr. Lillian said, so we can calm down. The we wasn't a we at all. Dr. Lillian was calm. Doug was so calm he was practically unconscious. Mike was tense, but he was calm enough. Jane was the one who, don't you dare tell me to calm down, Jane shrilled. She pointed a finger at Dr. Lillian. You're her doctor, but you're trying to make me feel like I am the cuckoo one here. There was no trying, Mike thought. Jane was the cuckoo one in the room. And what did he do to that poor man? The volume in her words dropped startlingly, and her tone changed to what Mike thought was supposed to be sympathetic. Mike watched Jane's lower lip quiver. He suppressed a smile when he saw Jane squinch up her eyes like she was trying to squeeze out a tear. Jane waved a hand like a southern belle, attempting to stave off an attack of the vapors. I'm sorry, she said briefly. Jane dug a tissue out of a large cream-colored purse. She blew her nose loudly. Mike glanced over at Dr. Lillian. She met his gaze and gave him a sympathetic look. Real sympathy. Not the fake crap that Jane was intending to sell to the room. Jane blew her nose again. Mike, Dr. Lillian, and Doug sat silently. This was a one-woman play. All they could do was wait for her to get to her next line. Jane finished nose blowing. She dropped her dirty tissue on the floor. Mike looked at it, and he felt his lip curl. He really hated his aunt. Now look, Jane said. Mike wasn't sure who she was talking to. Him? Dr. Lillian? Obviously not Doug. I tried to play nice, Jane went on. I really did. She clasped her hands together and pasted a nice smile on her face. Mike managed not to puke. But I have to think of Abby now, Jane said. She arranged her features into an expression that Mike thought was supposed to be regret. It looked more like constipation. Enough is enough, Jane said. Finally, something Mike could agree with. He had had more than enough of this meeting. No one said anything. Jane looked at Mike, and then she turned toward Doug. Doug still looked like he needed a ventilator. Mike wasn't sure Doug had heard a word Jane had said. Doug? Jane said. Doug didn't move. Jane leaned over and poked Doug in the ribs hard. Doug! She shouted. Doug jerked, coughed, and blinked several times. He looked around as if to remind himself of where he was. Once oriented, he cleared his throat and picked up the briefcase that sat next to his small feet. The feet were tucked into expensive black shoes. Mike thought they were called Oxfords. Jane tapped her long manicured fingernails, covered in pale pink polish that in no way matched her personality, on the slick leather of her bag. She pulled her lips together into a disapproving purse. Doug was oblivious of his client's scrutiny. He concentrated on opening his briefcase when he finally pulled out his sheaf of papers. Jane snatched them and turned to shove them at Mike. He had no choice but to take them. Glancing down, Mike's stomach shriveled. They were custody papers. In your heart, Jane said, you know this is the right thing to do. Mike didn't know that at all. In his heart or any other part of his body. I hope it's fine, Jane said. Mike lifted his head. And if I don't? Jane waved a hand toward Doug. Then my lawyer and I will take you to court, where any judge with an ounce of sanity will make sure you never see your sister again. Dr. Lillian cleared her throat and began. That's... Jane shot up from her chair and held the flat of her palm toward Dr. Lillian like a traffic cop. That's it, Jane said. We're done here. Jane took a step toward Doug and whacked him on the shoulder. Like an obedient, if abused, dog, he closed his briefcase and stood. Dr. Lillian stood too. What about Abby? She asked Jane. Have you considered what she may want? Jane slowly turned toward Dr. Lillian, pulling in her chin and drawing her eyebrows together. Jane tipped her head to one side, as though she was studying something in a circus freak show. Abby, Jane said, is 10 years old. In contrast to the serene oasis of Dr. Lillian's office, The development center's hallways were a chaos of color and light. The walls were papered in red, purple, and orange stripes, and the hall floor was covered in carpet squares of nearly every color imaginable. When Mike and Abby first met with Dr. Lillian, she had explained that a lot of kids at the center needed an abundance of stimulation. That might have been the case, but the visual stimulation got on Mike's nerves, especially now. After Jane and Doug had left Dr. Lillian's office, she'd asked Mike if he needed a minute. He shook his head and stood up. He was really rattled and furious, and actually, he didn't know exactly what he felt. He couldn't put a word to it. All he knew was that his stomach rose in at least 50 separate knots. His colon felt so tangled, he wouldn't have been surprised if food never got through it again. His head didn't feel so good either. His ears were hot, and he was sure an invisible hand was clamped onto his skull, trying to press him down to the floor. Mike didn't want to feel this way in front of Dr. Lillian. He needed to get out of there. That was why they were in the hall. When Mike said he had to go, Dr. Lillian had insisted on walking him out. Other than all the color, the hall was empty. Surprising himself because he'd planned on getting away without saying a word, Mike blurted, "She doesn't want Abby. She wants his trust fund." Dr. Lillian glanced at Mike and gave him a gentle smile of understanding. Dr. Lillian was good at understanding. Maybe that was why Mike kept talking. "The trust was set up for Abby, not for anyone else. Not me either. I can't even use it to pay the rent, and that's fine. I'm glad it's there for her." Dr. Lillian gave Mike another smile. This one seemed to be one of approval. "But Jane and that lawyer are going to find a way to get into the trust if she gets custody of Abby," Mike went on. "I just know it. That's what her long-term plan is." Dr. Lillian didn't disagree. "And in the short term, she'll get the checks from the state," Mike said. "It's not about Abby. It's about Jane. It's always about Jane." Dr. Lillian opened her mouth, but then closed it. Another sympathetic smile told Mike that, once again, she didn't disagree with him. Together, they turned a corner, heading toward the center's activity room. A couple boys about Abby's age were racing past. The smells of dirty socks and chocolate went with them. So did the pounding of their feet. "She makes some good points, though," Mike said. "Aunt Jane. I hate to admit that, but she's right that I'm not really fit to be raising a kid." Dr. Lillian finally spoke. "I know a little girl who would strongly disagree." Mike threw up his hands. "Come on, Doc. You can't be serious. Abby talks to the air more than she talks to me. I could drop dead and she'd be too busy drawing pictures to even notice." They reached the double doors that led into the activity room, but Dr. Lillian kept walking. She motioned for Mike to follow her. He did. Just past the doors, a long, wide window looked into the room, with thick, bright blue rubberized flooring and multiple play areas. Some of the areas were nothing more than a collection of colorful pillows and cushy play cubes that kids stacked into forts or lay on to draw or play games. Some were climbing towers. Some were elaborate cave-like areas similar to Abby's Heidi tent, but more sophisticated. The play areas were placed wide apart, so there was plenty of open space for the kids to run around. Mike did a quick count. 9 kids were either chasing one another or playing games. There were also several little tables dotting the room. The only one currently occupied was the one on the far side of the room. That was where Abby sat, by herself. Mike gestured toward his sister. "See what I mean?" Dr. Lillian watched Abby as she spoke. "You know, pictures held tremendous power for children." Dr. Lillian shifted to face Mike. "You've heard the expression, 'seeing is believing'?" Mike frowned and shrugged. "Sure." What was the doctor getting at? Dr. Lillian crossed her arms and leaned back against the glass. "Before we learn to speak, images are the most important tool we have for understanding the world around us. What's real, what matters to us most, these are things children learn to communicate about almost exclusively through pictures." Dr. Lillian paused, and Mike nodded. "Okay," he said. He still didn't see her point. Dr. Lillian cocked her head and thought for a second. Then she tried again. "See, kids aren't all that good at consciously accessing what they feel. Their artwork is sort of like their subconscious." "So you're saying Abby's drawings actually mean something?" Mike asked when the light bulb finally came on. Dr. Lillian nodded several times. "Without question." Mike chewed on that for a second. Dr. Lillian put a hand on his shoulder. "So let me ask you this. Who's featured, prominently, in 9 out of 10 of Abby's drawings?" Mike didn't speak, but he knew the answer to Dr. Lillian's question. Mike was in most of Abby's drawings. Dr. Lillian squeezed Mike's shoulder. "I can see you get it. Like it or not, you're her world." You might not believe you're the man for the job, but your sister certainly does. Mike stared at Dr. Lillian for a few seconds. Then he shifted his attention back to Abby. Could it be true? Was he really the best thing for Abby? For a second, Mike felt his shoulders lift. His stomach started to unknot, but then the inner snarls kinked up again. His shoulders slumped. Even if he was good for Abby, how could he take care of her if he couldn't earn enough to support them? And how could he give her what she needed when he couldn't even give himself what he needed? And then there was Aunt Jane. How could he stop her from getting custody? These and a dozen other questions swirled through Mike's mind. What if it's not up to me? Mike asked, voicing one of the questions aloud. Why, that's an idiot, but she's right. No judge in the world is going to take my side. Dr. Lillian shook her head. Don't be so quick to throw in the towel, she said. You're Abby's primary caregiver, have been for some time, and you're her immediate family. Demonstrate even a modicum of stability, and a judge might surprise you. Is that true? Mike wondered. Did he have a chance? Dr. Lillian tilted her head. Have you found a job yet? She asked. Mike didn't answer the question, but his face must have done it for him. Even a second of thinking about his job hunting failures probably made him look like he just sucked a lemon. Dr. Lillian patted Mike on the back. That will be a good place to start, she said.